In this lesson, we'll create the front fork for the bike. So let's use a different type of curve to draw out this, and let's use a Bezier curve. So I'll use a Bezier curve tool. This will allow us to actually use those Bezier handles to create the sharpness and change the shape of the curvature rather than placement of the CVs. And so we'll start up here by just drawing out a curve. And as we click and drag, we can pull out those handles to create the smoothness that we want for our curve. Okay. We can come in here and place our points, and I'll just very quickly place those in. And then we can go ahead and choose those points. We can move those around, and we can also modify the handles. So I can grab that handle and move it to get that nice sharp corner that I want with these 2 points rather than having 3 points. And then I can come in and actually just move the points themselves to the right spot. Okay, move those handles to get the curvature the way that I want. So if you like working with Bezier curves, then you can certainly create curves like that here in Maya to use to create your geometry. Okay, so I can go ahead and match that up. Get that matched up. Let me pull that out just a little bit more. Alright. And I see there's a little dip right in here. I'm going to go ahead and just tweak that a little bit so that dip kind of goes away. Same thing down here. I want to just tighten that up a little. Alright. So once we get something like this, this again is at the origin, so this is going to be that back portion or the middle portion of this piece here. Alright, and so let's go ahead and center our pivot. So we'll go to Modify, Center Pivot. Let's hit Control D to duplicate. Let's scale this down a little bit so it gets it in sort of the right spot. Okay, and then we can modify these points. So I'll take this point, move it kind of back up here. Okay, I want to keep the spacing fairly close to what it was before. And we can use our handles to modify the curvature. Okay, this time we want to do, let's get this kind of outer edge here. So it may be a little bit hard to see, but I want to have kind of an outer edge rather than that clear line there. That's going to be our next curve. Okay, so go ahead and drop that in. You may get areas that are not straight, so you can use your handles to kind of straighten those up. Alright. And let me just go ahead and make sure that these are all on that line. Okay, just using your handles to modify this. So this is a little bit different workflow than working with just the regular CVs that we would go in and manipulate. Okay, just kind of sharpen that up. Now this one we'll go ahead and move away. Okay, so we'll kind of move this out. And if you want to go to the front view and move it out about the same distance, maybe a little less than this larger piece, you can do that. Okay, let's now go ahead and just duplicate that one more time, and this time we will make that inner line, so just bring it in just a little bit. And let me grab the actual point instead of the handle there. Alright, and so that just gives us a little bit of thickness there for that line. And that's pretty close. We can go to our other line and just make sure that all these are sort of lined up. Now I want to leave those on the same plane. Okay. So now we need 2 more curves. Okay, so let's have one curve be this line right here, and then the last curve will be this profile line. Okay, so I'm going to let you go ahead and finish those out. I'm going to pause the video and just duplicate those curves and move those points so that they match up with that. So take this as an opportunity to practice doing the same thing we did. Duplicate your curves, make one for this line, and it can be at the same depth as this. And this one will be at the same depth as this one. So if you want to, you could copy this one and move the points rather than copying one of these. Okay, so let me pause the video, create those curves rather, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so there we've got the curve network here. 1, 2, 3, 4 curves plus this one. And so again, what we want to do is just duplicate these. Now we don't need to do this one because this is in the center just like this one. So all we need to do is these 3. Okay, so again, we'll just group those, flip them over to the other side. Actually, we want to duplicate them first. I'll flip them over to the other side. Now we'll take this curve, and remember our curve order. Even though these are different curves, we still need the curve order correct. So we'll go ahead, click on these 3, and loft that geometry. Okay, and then these 2 we'll go ahead and loft. Same thing with these 2. Okay, and now I want there to be a gap in the center, so I'm going to take these 2 and actually loft those together. Okay, so it makes that cap. And then we'll do the same thing here. We'll take this one and this one in the middle, loft it. Same thing here. And then we want to get that along the back there filled in. So we'll create geometry between those, and that gives you something like that. Now right now we've got the curves are sort of the same thickness the whole way. And so what we want to do is actually make it so that it tapers. All right. So we want to change the shape. Now we could have, when we're drawing our curves, we could have tapered the curves in so that they intersect up here and they come down. You can see that if we select a curve even now, take those points and start to move it in, we can change up the shape of that, but let's look at a different way. So once we've got our geometry created, if you remember, it's connected to the curves. So if we move the curves just like we did, they're going to move. So what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and select all of these, and to get rid of the connection between the curves and the NURB surface, we can delete the history. That will get rid of that connection. Okay, so now if we do anything with these curves, it's not going to affect the surface at all. So we can still keep the curves, but really what we want to do is modify this surface. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the curves for now. Let's select all this geometry, and we want it to deform it. Okay, so we're going to go to, instead of polygons or surfaces, let's go to animation and create deformers. There are many types of deformers we can use. The lattice is probably one of the most common, and so let's go ahead and create a lattice. And so what a lattice is kind of a cage around our object that will allow us to deform our object. So if I right click, I can select lattice points. I can, for instance, select these 2 points, go to scale, and I can scale them down to create a taper. Okay. Now if we want to taper this section in here, we can maybe taper that a little bit more. Okay. Then we can come down here. So you can see the areas of influence are, the parts of the geometry that are close to these points. So if I want to just affect the area up here, I can go ahead and scale that down, make that thinner. Okay. If we want to make any of this part thinner, we can go ahead and scale that down a little bit. And so we can really shape the geometry that we're using. In this case, it happens to be NURBS. It could be any kind of geometry that we want to work with here. Alright. So lattice is really good for deforming objects in certain ways, especially high resolution objects that you may not have a polygon cage to be able to use. You can use a lattice to actually do that. To get rid of the lattice, we can go ahead and select our geometry, delete the history, and that will get rid of our lattice. Okay, if we want to add another lattice, we can do that. Go into the options, you can see that we have divisions here, and so if we change these divisions, you can see that now that gives us more control. So I have more divisions here. I can affect this on a more local level. So I can come in here and affect this right here where these points are. And you can change the resolution of your lattice when you create it. You can see over here we have local influence and subdivisions up here that we can modify. Okay. And so we can use this to deform our model. Maybe I don't want it to be quite that narrow down here. You can go ahead and just sort of widen that up a little bit. And whenever we're done, go ahead and delete history. All right. Now to end, we'll go ahead and we want to add a little bit of a cap down here. So we can do that with a different type of geometry. So we've been using NURBS. Let's use a polygon. Let's just really quickly create a polygon primitive. Let's create a cylinder. Okay, that's going to be located down here. Let's just move it up into position. Okay, we'll rotate it down, sort of an angle. Now I want to be using a smoothing workflow for this. So since we're going to be smoothing this, we don't need as high a resolution. Okay, so we can go into our input, dial down those subdivisions to something like 8. Okay, and if we want to change the height, we can do that, or we can scale. Move this down into position. Okay, we just wanted to cover this. And I want it to be sort of an oval shape, so I'll scale just in the X. Okay, we can scale in the Y to change the thickness. Let's change the angle. Okay, we can come in here, and you can actually see the size that we want it to be here. We just want it to cover this. And so I'll just do something like that. Okay, let me make it a bit bigger. We can use our lattice again to manipulate this. We can also just grab those CVs and move them in if we want. Okay, so I'll make that a bit bigger. Now I want to smooth it. Okay, so you can see how when I smooth it, it's very soft. I want it to be a little bit harder. So to do that, to make that happen, we just need to add some resolution, because right now it's smoothing between this point, and this point. It's making a very smooth turn. So we need to add more resolution in there. And so we can do that by using the Insert Edge Loop tool. And just by adding a few edge loops, we can increase or decrease the space between those points that it's smoothing between, and we get something much harder. All right, we'll look more at this type of technique in the next lesson when we look at the pivot, creating some of the pivot geometry. Okay, we just want to create kind of a cap here, and we can rotate it to fit what we want to have and move it up. I just want it to cover that, those pieces. Okay, so in the next lesson, let's look at creating some of this pivot geometry for the front of our bike, and we'll use more polygon methods for that. Up to this point, we've been using some NURBS. We'll go and look at some polygon techniques for that. So we'll go ahead and do that in the next lesson.